Okay, well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for an introduction to ClinicalTrials.gov. I'm Celia Westemeyer, one of the ClinicalTrials.gov specialists. My coworker Meredith Rhodes will be presenting a little bit later. Brief outline of what we'll be talking about today is the history of ClinicalTrials.gov, what ClinicalTrials.gov is today, the laws, policies, guidance, and best practices, protocol registration and results system, and the clinical trials transparency. Start with a brief history of ClinicalTrials.gov. It was launched in 2000 in response to the Food and Drug Administration Modernization Act of 1997, which required the creation of a public database for drug interventions to connect potential participants with innovative and potentially life-saving treatments. Subsequent changes to the law via the Food and Drug Administration Amendments Act of 2007 to its final rule in 2017 provide a legal definition of applicable clinical trials for which the law applies. Details about registration, maintenance, and results reporting are also presented to remain in compliance with the laws. In 2019, the ICMJE required the description of an individual participant data, IPD, sharing plan at registration to CT.gov to encourage researchers to share and leverage data from the participant volunteers. And as of this year, we are no longer able to request good cause extensions for results reporting once the results due date has passed. What is ClinicalTrials.gov today? The original intent was to connect people with potentially life-saving treatments. However, over time, it has evolved to be a place for a variety of stakeholders to look for transparency, fulfillment of ethical obligations, scientific integrity, and so forth. It helps reduce publication bias by having the summary results. It's important to share whether the science worked. The focus for us at UW especially is the transparency, keeping centered on the participants, and that we can use it to show our work. Regardless of all the legal and policy requirements, we can choose to voluntarily register for all of the reasons listed on this slide. There are many ways to search for a trial on ClinicalTrials.gov, including this map, which really shows how massive the database is. Globally, as you can see, there are over 400,000 trials registered to the site. About 54,000 have results reported or created, and 22% are completed with results posted. You can also see, in comparison to what we have at UW, we have just over 900 studies registered, 600 are completed, and we have, better than the global average, we have 30% completed and results reported. And these numbers are constantly changing. We updated this in just about 2-3 weeks ago, and I'm sure the numbers are already different. We'll get a little into the laws, policies, and best practices. So what requires at CT.gov registration? Not everything is required to be registered, but again, any human research study can be registered. You can choose to be transparent. But a few of the regulations are that CMS requires that studies be registered before enrollment begins. And fortunately at UW, we have internal processes that catch these trials to make sure that occurs. The FDA requires registration of interventional phase 2 through 4 trials of drugs or devices and must be registered within 21 days of the first participant enrolling. NIH regulations apply to all clinical trials funded by the NIH, and they too must be registered within 21 days of the first participant enrollment. The International Committee of Medical Journal Editors has no laws, no legal power behind their registration, but should you wish to publish, they will require that you registered the study prior to the first enrollment. A lack of registration will impact the ability to publish in journals, and currently there are over 7,200 member journals. This slide gives a little more detail on the previous slide showing, ICMJE and CMS don't require results reporting, but NIH and FDA do. Any phase that they cover. But the most important takeaway from this slide should be the repercussions of not registering. ICMJE, as I mentioned, can and will refuse to publish if you haven't registered. The NIH can deny or take away funding. FDA has the ability to inflict monetary penalties of up to $12,000 per day, or you can lose your HHS funding, impose FDA sanctions, and or issue public notices of non-compliance. Finally, CMS can delay study initiation and or delay or deny billing. So the big picture is that we want to keep it participant-centered. These are some keywords pulled from various UW Health, SMPH, and DOM mission and values. Got professionalism, scholarship, health equity, stewardship, integrity and accountability, social responsibility, diversity and inclusion. We want, at the bottom, there's a link to a prep talk that discusses making the shift from referring to people as patients or subjects to being sure to refer to them as participants. Participant has a better connotation. It implies the power of choice, or that they're volunteering to do this. It's not something that's being inflicted upon them. So we'll get to best practices. Bearing in mind our goal of participant-centeredness and transparency, as well as being in alignment with the global effort for transparency, best practice would really be to make all research involving human participants known through the public database. This graphic shows that the Declaration of Helsinki supports this ideal, and in fact, paragraphs 35 and 36 of the declaration speak directly to reporting and public dissemination of results of research with no discrimination as to whether the results were positive. So even if you found out this did not work, they are encouraging you to go ahead and post your study.
And I think that's my cue. Thank you, Celia. I am going to move forward and talk a little bit about kind of what our CT.gov service at the university does, and a little bit more about the process for registering, maintaining, and reporting results to CT.gov. CT.gov or ClinicalTrials.gov is the public site. The protocol registration and results system is the interface that we use to make updates to the public site, to register and make updates and report results. So there's actually two websites, CT.gov and the PRS site. This slide is to indicate the importance of the protocol to the public record. Essentially, the CT.gov record is to reflect the protocol at any point in time. And so we register the study with the best practice of prior to the first participant enrolled, we register the protocol directly to the public. Celia and I, when we are actually registering on behalf of a study team, we often cut and paste directly from the protocol to populate the protocol record of the public site. This slide shows our study documents at the top with the protocol and statistical analysis plan, any protocol amendments, and then the final protocol and statistical analysis plan at the top, and how that translates to the public record over time, over the study timeline. So we can register studies prior to or just after initial IRB approval. The study start date is technically the date upon which the first participant is enrolled, and that's a key date that's held in the public record. You can look that up for any CT.gov record. Any protocol amendments subsequently need to be reflected in the public record within 30 days of the change, as do any study status changes. So when you open your study up to recruitment or close it to accrual, those study status changes per FDA law are required to be reflected within 30 days of the change. And again, not all studies that are registered to ClinicalTrials.gov are within the scope of FDA law, but all are managed as if they were, with a common set of requirements in the PRS system. The primary completion date on the record is the date upon which all data collection is complete to answer the primary outcomes. And that's often the same date as the study completion date, which is the date upon which all data collection is complete from all enrolled participants, with the exception of any longer-term follow-up or secondary outcome measures or adverse events data that's collected after the initial primary completion date is met. Most studies we register, those dates are the same. If your study is held under the revised common rule, it's, in other words, has federal funding, the informed consent form is due to the public, and the CT.gov record is one of those places it can be delivered to the public. So anytime after the study is closed to recruitment and within 60 days of the final data collection complete, that informed consent form, anyone that was used to consent any participant in the study, can be uploaded to the public record. There's a whole documents section of the public record. And for any studies for which results are due, the results module is due within 1 year of that primary completion date. So it's very important that we relay what that primary completion date definition is. It's a dynamic, typically a dynamic date. We're chasing it around, we're updating it as the study progresses. But it's important for legal reasons that we get that date as accurate as possible, because it sets the results due date for the record. And Celia and I help you to maintain compliance with the record. There's just a lot of rules and regulations, and we have processes in place to help maintain those records and reach out to study teams to make sure that they're compliant moving forward. So we understand that a record requires registration to CT.gov because we run weekly reports out of Arrow. And Arrow, we look at studies that have initial IRB approval or have been submitted for initial IRB approval and have passed scientific review. At that point, we typically reach out to a study team to offer our services of registration. We are participating in a sort of an audit group that looks at the answers to the CT.gov page in Arrow to confirm that, teams aren't slipping through the cracks particularly if there's a legal or policy requirement for results that aren't being met. And we'll often reach out to teams where we think if they're going to subsequently publish those results, it may be in their best interest to make a CT.gov record per the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors guidance. We help people get the NCT number assigned more rapidly because we have some good experience with the back and forth with the PRS systems. And we can have that number assigned prior to the initial IRB approval or after this. It's up to the study team, but we would recommend a best practice of adding NCT numbers to consent forms to help your participants locate study information in the public. In this case, you may want to register your record to the public prior to initial IRB approval so that you can seamlessly add that NCT number to the consent form at that time. We then monitor ARROW again on a weekly basis. We're looking for protocol amendments. We also look at continuing reviews to make sure that for study teams that haven't documented their studies in ENCORE, sometimes we lose touch with status changes and whether or not a study is still active or not. And so we can see in continuing reviews at least a snapshot in time of what the study situation is. So we monitor ARROW for protocol amendments, and we'll reach out if we suspect that the amendment should be reflected in the public record. We also do monitor ENCORE for study status and completion dates. More so study status. Completion dates is our dream to be able to access that in ENCORE. And we would recommend a best practice of utilizing ENCORE and using it in real time to assist in the compliance of your public record. We can easily see in ENCORE the study status at any time, and upon close to accrual, we can look at your final number of enrolled and such, which makes it pretty easy for us to update and keep you informed of updates that should be required to your record. And finally, we do assist with results reporting to CT.gov, should that be required or voluntary. Results are due within 1 year of that primary completion date, the date upon which all data collection is complete from all enrolled participants to answer the primary outcome. Protocol and statistical analysis plan are due with results at the time of results reporting. Just a reminder again, if your study is federally funded and held within the scope of the revised common rule, we can also upload that informed consent form that was used to consent anybody to your study to the documents section of the PRS. And we would recommend a best practice of submitting results in obligation to participants and in service to the scientific community, particularly on studies that have been terminated early, for which there's a handful of data, and it may not be powered for meaningful results. It's basically a summary results section that shows the rest of the research community what data you may have that they may be able to leverage to make those results meaningful at a later date. A little bit about clinical trials transparency. I love this little cartoon. I'm forever going to show it. And this is from Nathan Pyle. He writes a comic called Strange Planet. And this being says, I have attempted science, and the judge says, please explain. And he says, I formed an idea, and then I discovered I was wrong. And the judge says there are numerous diagrams, and he says, I was wrong in numerous ways. I've produced a detailed tribute to my wrongness. And the judge says that is science. So we often forget that not all science works out, but all science is science, and it's useful information to the public. There's a link on this slide, which you will have access to a TED Talk that was done in September 2016 about clinical trials transparency. And in this TED Talk, they suggest at this time that only half of clinical trials have results posted anywhere to the public. And that is an estimate, of course. It's hard to know if a clinical trial took place if there's no information about it. But their estimates were based on any results reported anywhere. And this lack of information is challenging. It's challenging for policymakers to make informed decisions about public health. She goes on to explain that about 100,000 people died from this drug trial, or as a result of taking lorcainide, which was I believe it's a heart drug, because not all the information was released about this drug to the public. They spent a lot of money on Tamiflu over in the UK, and it turns out that there was no real benefit when all the data came out to even taking that. And so the transparency around the science is a super important thing globally. When knowledge is withheld, when we don't know a clinical trial happened, trials can be repeated, and the same sorts of mistakes can be repeated as well. Participant volunteers assume this risk, and they give up their time to improve the evidence-based, and so we owe it to them and to the public to show our work. And as of 2015, only 20% of trials registered to ClinicalTrials.gov were technically legal. 80% were out of compliance with FDAA law. And that number is rapidly changing over time, but it's nowhere near where it needs to be at this time. So there's a lot of eyes on the public ClinicalTrials.gov records, including something that's not on this screen, actually, other clinical trials search engines. I know at the UW, we have a search engine called Study Finder, and that I know mines ClinicalTrials.gov records at the UW for brief descriptions of the studies and eligibility criteria, for example. It was really enlightening to me to see how many custom clinical trials search engines there are around the country, around the world, that access ClinicalTrials.gov, that source that data into their search engines. And so when that record is not up to date, not in compliance, the status is wrong, these clinical trial search engines will reflect the wrongness of the record. So it's really important to keep it participant-centered, written in sort of a lay term, particularly the summaries, and up to date, so that we're not misleading potential participants. In addition, these clinical trials, there's a number of transparency groups globally that are watching these records, including all trials, as I talked about in the previous slide. There's this FDAA trials tracker that I'll show you a screenshot from in a moment, Transparamed. There's a number of articles published in some leading journals about clinical trials transparency, and we happen to know about a lot of them the day they're out because they make news, and we always check to see if Wisconsin's on them. Once in a while it is, so we're doing our best to keep Wisconsin on the positive side of clinical trials transparency now. So this FDAA trials tracker, FDAA, again, the Food and Drug Administration Amendments Act. This is the legal implications for registering and results reporting to the public. So there's this FDAA trials tracker. It's a group, I believe, out of Oxford that are mining ClinicalTrials.gov to show how non-compliant the records are. It's kind of a trial shaming site. And so part of our mission, Celia and I, are trying to keep UW off the tracker. We do have records on the tracker. Many of them have been resolved, but they remain there. This is as of June 15th. You can see this ridiculously high number of potentially imposed fines as a result of noncompliance on ClinicalTrials.gov and to the federal law, and $0 claimed by the U.S. government. So this has been a large driver to us, to the nationwide ClinicalTrials.gov task force, to all sorts of academic medical institutions and industry to get our acts together and avoid these potential fines, because at some point, at any time, the FDA could be organized enough to begin collecting these fines. And they have recently, in 2021, started to send out notices of noncompliance that are now public, and we can go read through to see what certain noncompliance issues are with study teams. At the time I made this slide, there were 3 public letters of noncompliance. Now there's 4 at this time. And you can click through this image and look at those letters of noncompliance, and you can see the back and forth communications between the study team and the FDA. There's 1 PI. The rest of them are industry so far, but there's 1 private, there's 1 PI at an academic medical center who has a notice of noncompliance at this point. They've all been resolved without fines to this point, but they're starting to gather their steam and organize toward actually imposing fines. The PI, this Dr. Petrikovets, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, published his results and said, I've already published them, and the FDA came back and said that's not sufficient. The requirement is to submit summary data to CT.gov. And then he went back and he said, short-staffed, I'm too busy. And the FDA came back and said, that's not a good excuse. You've had plenty of time. So there was definitely some back and forth in this notice of noncompliance that's worth reading through. By the way, it's now, with inflation, it's near $12,500 a day for noncompliance, and that is written into the law that this can inflate along with all of the other things that are currently inflating. So our service, ClinicalTrials.gov service line snapshot. Again, I kind of went through some of our process already, but we are running weekly reports out of Arrow and Encore to learn of records that require a registration and reaching out to study teams to assist in that. We also provide one-on-one training for PRS users. We encourage you to be empowered to make your own updates to the record. And so we're happy to meet virtually and walk you through the PRS system so that you feel like you can update that on your own. And otherwise, we're happy to do that for you. For maintenance, we again do these weekly reports to learn of new protocol amendments. We are also running monthly reports out of the PRS system to learn when anticipated study start dates are coming up or anticipated study completion dates are coming up. And if nothing else has changed in the record in the past year, there's an annual verification that is due. And so we reach out to study teams to make sure their records maintain are accurate at any time. And so you'll hear a lot from us in those cases. And results. We do engage with study teams that have results coming due. And we recommend we start to populate those results a few months prior to the actual results due date. There's a number of modules in the results section that we should be able to populate pretty quickly, including a participant flow module, baseline characteristics, and then the other two are outcome measures and adverse events data. Results are probably a whole nother presentation in and of themselves, so let us know if you're interested in learning more about that. And this last page of resources, a number of resources, and I just want to point out the first one, the top of this list is our new CT.gov service line website. And we do intend to update this in time with relevant resources that we create, or if we learn about anything new in the National Task Force, which we're both part of. We have linked their investigator guidance to CT.gov document that we update once or twice a year to keep it as current as possible. And that will help you to navigate all of the laws and policies and guidance and the PRS, actually, if you wanted to log in and start to update, create your own records or input your results. That's a great place to go. And you can always email us. Our link is there as well. And I believe that is it. And we will be happy to take any questions you have.
Thanks, Meredith and Celia, for a great presentation. Really appreciate that. We did not have any questions in the chat. So if people do have questions, feel free to unmute yourself or drop them into the chat. Any suggestions for further trainings, also open to hearing those as well. Yes, the recording will be available for a short period of time. We'll have it on our website, but we'll notify you, everyone, once it's posted.
Thank you, Gina.
There's a question, is there a process that identifies which trials need to be registered in CT.gov, or does your team just contact the study team?
So at present, there's a page in the Arrow application that asks a series of questions that will help to determine whether or not a study is required to have a CT.gov record. We also have as kind of an addendum to that, there is an FDA regulated research query tool, which we have linked on the website to help determine whether or not your study is FDA regulated, a study of an FDA regulated drug or device, which is not trivial. It's not straightforward necessarily either. And that has implications for whether or not it's an applicable clinical trial under FDAA law. We recommend any interventional study to have a record per ICMJE guidance as a contingency of subsequent publication. So starting there, I guess the main criteria for whether or not it needs a record or would be recommended to have a record at the UW would be, is it an interventional or observational trial? There are certain observational trials that are required to have a record. For example, if it's PCORI funded, they seem to follow the guidance more of the Declaration of Helsinki. So the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute wants your patient-centered outcomes out there. If it's otherwise funded, the funding agency would spell out that requirement for a public record in the award letter.
So another question, do you suggest reviewing the information on the clinical trials website before contacting your office for assistance to update the record?
I feel like we do a pretty decent job of outreach there to make sure records are up to date. So we'll reach out to study teams. Those resources on our website are very great background information. They're very great kind of a foundation for the purpose and the process of registering trials to CT.gov. If a study needs to be updated, the study team is entirely empowered to do that themselves. And what happens functionally at the UW is that when a study team updates their record, there's a place on the record that says entry complete, a big green button. And once that button is clicked by the study team, our office is notified that the record has been updated, and we can then release it for PRS review. So typically, if a record is amended in some way, we'll just release that directly to PRS for their review and update on the public record, which takes a couple of days. If it's a brand new, like initial registration, and we get a notification that there's a new registration record, Celia and I will review it carefully based on some of the review criteria that is actually public to everybody on the PRS. And we'll just make sure that record looks like it's going to pass review. If it doesn't look like it's going to pass PRS review, we'll then reach back out to the study team to make suggested changes such that it will. I am totally okay with sharing our slides, and we will send those in to distribute. Did that answer your question?
It does not appear we have any other questions. So if there's no other questions, then we can end the session. And thank you all for joining us today.